All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the launch event for Education Reimagined series here on Clubhouse. Really excited to be doing this with my fabulous co-host Raya, who I'll introduce in a bit. I've been a part of several Clubhouse conversations on education, whether it's the future of education, whether it's innovation in education. And a lot of them have been brilliant dialogues, right? There have been conferences that have happened. There was an Educate conference that happened recently. There were dialogues that were happening on teacher development, grassroots movements. The question in my mind was, well, why do we need another series? And I suppose this is where we dug in to figure out, what's the underlying, catalyst for this. And I suppose just diving into my background, I've been involved in education for the last 20 odd years. From here in Dubai, whether it's executive education, whether it's leadership education, entrepreneurship education, and most recently, the meta discussions on education. I've been involved with a very large global summit that's happening in Dubai later this year. It's called RewirEd, which is happening in association with Dubai Cares. It's hosted by them along with Expo 2020 and the Ministry of Foreign and International Affairs here in the UAE. So that dialogue that I've been having with various stakeholders in the last, I would say 15 odd months since January last year has been a very, I would say, interesting set of conversations with stakeholders, multilateral level, at the highest level. And what we have realized is that in the last, I would say 15 months, both pre-COVID and now, of course, where we are, the dialogue has moved beyond just ideation. There's this discussion, the need for moving from ideas to action. And so we said, fine, well, let's kind of try to curate a conversation here on Clubhouse that brings all those actors in, that leads in the build up to the RewirEd Summit here in Dubai in December. Education is a complex system. It's intertwined with multiple layers, dynamics, stakeholders, and agendas. So when one thinks of transforming and innovating education, it's a system change challenge at the macro level, beyond the usual narratives and status quo education bundle of curriculum, redesign, teacher development, certifications, school facilities, and assessments. And there's an opportunity to co-create pathways forward that can help us navigate the increasing complexities of our time. And the discussion we'd like to have in this room in the next several weeks is look at that macro level conversation, the structural elements, the invisible structures, the dark matter, the deep code. So whether it's financing, governance, incentives, in addition, of course, to the actual grassroots conversations in terms of curriculum, in terms of making things happen at the student level, and so on. So with all this work that we've been doing, like I said, at RewirEd, there's an initiative that has been launched by them called RewirEd Talks. So this event actually is strongly associated with RewirEd Talks. It's basically giving the opportunity to have everyone involved at a global level in that dialogue so we can build these coalitions that can help us, create these pathways together. So, that's a very quick introduction. Again, delighted to see so many people joining in from all over. Thank you, Kai. I see you also joining us today. I've got a few people here I'm going to invite on stage as well who've got strong interest in EdTech. So we'll begin by, that was the background on why we are doing this. I'm going to now have my co-host, Raya, spend a short time in talking about her background as well as to what she's been doing. Because at the end of the day, today there's a lot more importance that's placed on doing things at the grassroots level, not just talk, but walking the talk. And Raya is at the front end. She's a brilliant educator. She's been involved with alternative schooling. She's just launched a new platform called the School of Humanity, a global online platform. So I'm going to have her talk about that, and then we'll kind of basically get into a dialogue with people who have joined us today from across the world, hopefully, and discuss, where is the need to reimagine education, and most importantly, what are the immediate first steps we can take? And every week we kind of build on this dialogue at different levels. So with that, Raya, thanks for joining us, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Aman, for that lovely introduction. And hi, everyone. It's so nice to see some familiar faces and a few new faces as well. As Aman mentioned, one of the reasons we're hosting these discussions is really to start rethinking, reimagining, and reinventing education. The series of Clubhouse events that we're having over the next few weeks really comes from the awareness that we're coming out of a pandemic, and out of the realization that over the last year, we've seen more changes in the education system than we probably saw in the last previous 10 years combined. And there were two realizations for me during the course of the pandemic, one positive and one negative. The positive realization was that um, radical global transformations in education is possible. I think prior to that, a lot of the advocacy work that I would do or my team and I would do in promoting completely new models of education sounded insane, sounded crazy. But after what we all experienced in the last year, we've realized that really huge changes are possible and in some cases necessary. I think the more negative realization was that simply digitizing the same outdated industrial era model is not enough, right? We also need to reinvent how we teach, why we teach, or where we learn, and everything from the curriculum, the pedagogy, the entire education system, if you will. So Aman and I hope to take a more systems level approach with these conversations over the next few weeks. I'll wrap up the intro just with a quick background about myself. I'm a serial education entrepreneur and founder of a new school called the School of Humanity. It's an online school with a completely interdisciplinary curriculum, skill-based curriculum, where students develop future fluencies by solving global challenges. So the mission is to ultimately reinvent education, starting with high school education.
All right, wonderful. Thank you very much, Vaya, for that lovely, I guess, background on yourself and why I guess this is so exciting for us to explore together. We've got a serial Clubhouse education expert in the room. I'd like to now invite Kai to say a few words. He's been probably in a lot of rooms since the world of Clubhouse began several months ago. So I'd like to have him share his perspectives on what's been happening as he has seen the world of education being reimagined at the grassroots level, at the meta level, and so on and so forth. So Kai, I would love to have you say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aman, and very nice to meet you, Raya, and looking forward to speak to Nathan as well. I'm a firm believer that it is perhaps the best time for the last 50 years to actually fundamentally enhance the way education is conducted and delivered. I hope this marks a wonderful start for all of us as well. The school system, as we know of, is probably the best kind of adaptation from the Industrial Revolution era. As you can see, that school is really the system is a lot about test. It's about uniformity. It's about follow the rules. It's about conform to standard. And the future, on the other hand, is very different. We are moving into imminently a creator economy, and for good or for bad, and for all the countries in the world, whether you're rich or poor. And technology, the effect of technology is upon us. So we can see that nowadays there's the internet companies, the alternative energy companies, and a lot of artificial intelligence based companies and chip industries. These are the driving force of the economy tomorrow. That's exactly where our children is moving into tomorrow. And at the same time, we adult, we're under immense amount of pressure to actually to very quickly to try to catch up what's happening in blockchain and what's happening in NFT, and this is horrible. And we're probably forced to explain what is quantum computing about, and while at the same time we have to come to terms with why USA is so split up, why there are so much conflict and a hidden kind of pressure on our happiness on this planet, and where with environmental pressure, with the plastic crisis, with all sorts of challenges that we have no choice but to come in solidarity and actually work together with people of different faiths to actually come back with so many challenges, so many very difficult issues to resolve. And what do we do about it? I mean, the answer lies in learning, in education, in searching the harmony and balance. So, and in come to terms with technology, and come to terms with each other, different faiths. So there's just so much we need to do for with education. So I feel that there is a sense of responsibility, certainly for me as an education serial entrepreneur. I teach, I focus on science education because I think science literacy is very important. I build a number of virtual reality education solution companies because I think to use this kind of technology to hopefully fundamentally rewrite textbooks and rewrite how education is to be delivered is important. And there's range of other things I'm working on. So I think it's fortunate that I was able to find some people with the same resolve, with the same sense of responsibility, and it just doesn't end there. And I think it's really, I feel really inspired and also humbled to be in this room tonight. Sorry, tonight in UK's time, and I'm looking forward for to learn more about this event, and I will do my best to actually contribute. In the meantime, I'm wearing the badge of Educate. Now, Educate is a first um, global education conference on Clubhouse. And we actually managed. It started with the idea by this gentleman, a US based history teacher called Cyrus Mirror. And so he's just wondering whether we can utilize Clubhouse as a tool for seminars. As we know that education conference normally costs a lot of money and immense amount of flight and carbon footprint for everybody, a lot of cost in order to just have those few conversations. But luckily, with this wonderful platform of Clubhouse, we can all come together from different parts of the world and to share our heart out. So we are the first education educate has completed, started from Earth Day, 3 days, 25 different countries, 200 rooms. We're now moving to a lot of more deep dive, smaller education conference before another major global event. So hopefully we can find more speakers and more participants of Educate from this room. And of course, if we can do anything, utilize the resources what we have built up from the first Educate to enhance what you are doing, Aman and Raya, I'm more than happy to. So yeah, super excited to be here. And thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'm done for now.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kai. Actually, yeah, the Educate conference was an interesting phenomenon for sure. Something like that happening at such a vast level over 3 days with so many rooms, as you said, so many speakers. That was amazing, right? How the world came together on this, platform where previously people may not have connected together and so on. So I've got another speaker I'd love to invite, and Nathan is a friend. Nathan is also involved in leading probably the world's largest, education wiki digest. It's called Ed Public. I'm going to have him say a few words. He probably has spoken to more people in education, interviewing them from a journalistic perspective. So knowing the good side and the dark side as to what they're up to, and hopefully can shed some light as to what he has learned in the last 12 months when he's been speaking to these leaders at let's say management level, the actual operator levels, the investor levels, and what he's learned. And after that we'll get into a dialogue around a question that I thought could be quite interesting for the audience to also participate in. But with that, Nathan, please join us on stage. Thank you.
Thanks so much. It's nice to join this room. Kai and Raya, lovely to meet you virtually. Kai, also solidarity for notice your badge and thinking about the plight of the teachers and the people that are in India right now. We were on a conference with Ahmad last week where I got to speak to a teacher who sort of puts these things in perspective. We ed tech has seen this massive explosion of funding over the last year. I've been working at it for 10 plus years. And we have seen these sort of bubbles go. You see, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars sort of get moved around. And yet at the end of the day, education technology are about people. And when we speak to teachers, I think particularly the ones that we talked to last week who are working in India, these are very human problems that are going on and trying to deal with students who are terrified and scared of the rising death count, and scared about the sort of the just dealing with the trauma. And so I just sort of I think that's a centering point before we think about the numbers and sort of the trends that we see that are going on in education. COVID has been a sort of accelerant to the move and the shift towards education technology. I've worked for big companies and small companies in the global ed tech space, most recently for Pearson. And so for the last year, I've been working with some smaller NGOs as well as EdTech Public, which is this wiki database of EdTech transactions. And so it's very interesting to sort of see that perspective. And over the last year, what we have seen The headlines are there, huge investments, huge sort of deals that have come in as people have tried to take advantage of the shift to virtual. You see the rise of tutoring, sort of virtual tutoring has been a big thing that has seen a lot of money come into that, and that will obviously continue and grow, and not go away. And we see the consolidation. Baidu out of India has been a big player, and they're kind of gobbling up companies right now. But it's been interesting to talk to some of the people that are funding these companies. I had a chance to sit down with the head of uh, Owl VC, which is one of the largest players, and hearing their sort of vision of how funding and capital is shaping the world of education and education technology. And we could spend a long time. I'm kind of curious to hear what the rest of the room and the speakers what to chat about, because there's sort of a wide range of things that we could go into. But I think kind of two things that I'm interested in is I'm interested not just kind of how technology is going to accelerate education, be part of it, because it will play a role. We know that. The question is what role will technology play in education? Is it going to make us have an education system that's more human, more fair, more equal, that's going to sort of amplify the best bits of us, that's going to actually help bring people together? I have a friend, Julia Freeland Fisher, who works out of the US and is really interested in how technology reshapes social capital. It helps people who are from less advantaged backgrounds gain access to sort of the soft networks. That's really interesting to me. But technology, or is it just going to be used to sort of pull up the ladder from the haves and the have-nots? That is less interesting to me. I know there will be a market for that. I know people will pay for that, and that's important. And that's something we catalog and we pay attention to. But it's less interesting than the sort of the technological gains, the people that are working to really extend those ladders and bring people closer together, and create a world that's a bit fairer. I think we do have a choice in how we do that. I think that's why this conference and this conversation, the work I'm on, the work at this conference in Dubai, or at the end of the year, is going to be so important. And so that's what I'm interested in. And so I would be happy to sort of talk about any of the trends or things that were going on. But as the capital is flowing around the money that's going around the world, I'm looking for the companies that are going to be helping to bridge those gaps, rather than just sort of accelerate the people who already have some of the advantages, who have access to those great networks and great tools and great tutors and teachers. I'll stop for now. I always think stop less, but it's lovely to be here in the room with you.
Thanks, Nathan. Appreciate that. I'm glad to have another, I would say, veteran from the world of Clubhouse and education join us on stage. Just like Kai, he runs his education room for Education Catalyst. Giancarlo Brotto, I've been in some of his rooms. They've been, brilliant, intriguing conversations. I'd love to have him come on stage and just give us a sense on what he has again discovered, both in his rooms as well as other rooms that he's been a part of in the last several weeks when it comes to reimagining education, whether it's at a meta level or at a grassroots level. Giancarlo, would love to have you join us. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, man, and good to see you, Raya, Kai. Nice to meet you, Nathan, and all of you in the audience as well. Some great people that have actually inspired, I guess, the answer to the question that you asked, right? And it's no doubt, whether you're looking at Saki, who's looking at, girls in STEM, or Talar and the work that she's doing, even with Project Zero in Harvard, and Derek with international schools. I think all roads in all different areas and avenues, and I think the beauty of the conversations here on Clubhouse have been all centered around whatever lens that we happen to be on. We're all kind of determined to look at where we are, or where we were, where we are, and where we like to be is a kind of a common theme that I think that everybody's expressed, and no doubt there's many challenges to get there, and I think there's different approaches as well. I would say more often than not, I've seen the approach of, well, let's just two or three of us put our head down and get going at it, which is a great approach, and I think we need that. We need innovation. We need that going. But I would throw up the perspective that we also need not to forget that there's systems, right, that connect these leaders and these hundreds of thousands of educators and learners, and how are we interconnecting these great ideas and these concepts and finding ways of diffusing and distilling them throughout the systems. And I think I don't know if she's still in the room. She's not in the room, but she just left. But someone who's actually working with systems to actually do that, to transform some of these concepts and ideas that might start from these unique schools, these micro environments, but then find their way to get to masses, like to entire countrywide initiatives. And that's something that I think is uplifting for what we think about new ideas and new concepts and new ways that we're pushing the education boundaries, and then how we figure out. And this is the part that would excites me about the conversations, is how do we figure out how to get these things at scale so that the impact knows no boundaries, knows no borders, and obviously is not dependent on where your postal code is. So that's something that I look forward to. And this past year I've had the privilege of convening government leaders on this topic. And Nathan, I think what you said, and Kai, ties to what you were saying as well. The core of it is this human concept, right? So as much as we know technology and ed tech specifically is evolving so rapidly, and what it's able to do and serve and support in ways that are beyond, I used to be a high school math teacher, beyond what I could have done in a classroom, right? What we have to always remember is that when we convene people, there's a human element, right? This connection between learners, this connection between learner and guide or instructor, whatever you want to call the person who's kind of orchestrating it, right? And when we hyper focus on the interconnectivity between those two pieces, and how these new ways in which we look at tools that are enablers can enable any one of those pieces, right? Student to student interaction, student to orchestrator interaction. That's where the conversation gets really interesting and exciting. And how do we enable those connections to be formed and to be forged is what I'm always curious to hear about. So I'm Giancarlo, and I'm looking forward to listening to the conversation. But I have a meeting in 8 minutes, so I'll drop down to the listeners' lounge.
All right, wonderful. Thanks, Giancarlo. Yeah, I mean, I think what you've said is very relevant, because part of the work that we are doing both at RewirEd and also as part of the Reimagine series is to move to a stage where we kind of stop discussing pilots and actually get into prototyping and scaling contextually relevant models in different markets as appropriate, versus just having high level, high table conversations where people really don't understand what it means to scale. So that's a brilliant observation and insight. So, I would have loved to have had Riti join us. She's actually been very kind in having host this initial conversation from K-20 educators. She's building an amazing social network for global educators, where educators can connect and collaborate and learn. So hopefully in the next call that we will do, which we are doing every week from here on, she can elaborate more on that. But feel free to go to our website, which is k20educators.com. All right, so I want to ask this question, which I guess is triggered partly by what Giancarlo also said, and I suppose is something that we are very intrigued at the work that we're doing for RewirEd, which is that if we give you a stage, which is a global stage, which technically could be an in-person stage, because this event is hopefully happening in person in December 12th to 14th. Actually, today is a historic day, because today actually the registration is open. So if you have time, please go there, RewirEd2021.com. But imagine, we give you this magic wand of having a talk at RewirEd in front of thousands of people, hopefully in person, but also virtually. My question to both people here on the panel, but also then to the audience, is, what message would you send out on reimagining? But more importantly, what message would you put out that may make people uncomfortable in their chairs, squirm in their seats, if you may, but may be necessary to get things to move from the things that have been probably lying in the closet for the last 2 centuries, if not longer. So with that, I guess I'm going to open up the floor, but maybe if, on the panel of speakers right now, Raya, Kai, Nathan, Giancarlo, if you have any thoughts around that, like, what would your headline billboard say if we get you on stage? And 2, what would you say that would actually make people uncomfortable as you say that?
I love that question. I love that question. So for me, I think my message would come in 2 parts. One thing I love to share when I talk about reinventing or reimagining education is that it's already been done. I know it's, a lot of the aspects of the model that I like to advocate for, which often involves models of high schools that have no exams, that have no subjects, that have no curriculum, sound pretty insane, and they sound pretty radical. But there are case studies from around the world of such model being successful and showing that it can be done, and it's often more effective than traditional industrial era models. So for example, you have the New View School in Boston, which is a school that's been running for many years now. They have no subjects, they have no classes. It's a completely interdisciplinary studio-based model where students work on one problem for 2 weeks, and by designing a solution to that problem, they develop the necessary skills, mindsets, and competencies. They do both full-time school, virtual school, but they also have kind of complementary, supplementary programs. And they have kids that have gotten into MIT, Harvard, and beyond. Another lovely example is the Agora School in Netherlands. Once again, very similar. There are no classes, there are no subjects. It's completely personalized learning paths. Students work with their educators who are actually framed as coaches, and they work on whatever they want to work on. They learn whatever they want to learn. And that's, again, another successful school. From a higher education perspective, the London Interdisciplinary School just launched last year. They have degree providing authority, and they essentially, you can get an undergraduate degree with them without actually picking a major. So again, a fully interdisciplinary degree. These are just a few examples, but there are many, many more around the world. The second part of my message, if I had the audience at Rewired, would be the reason that some of these changes don't happen, especially in the MENA region, is because of policy. It's because of the heavy regulations that are in place that often prohibit such innovation to happen in education. From my experience being in this space, in this region, to me, that is the biggest inhibitor of true innovation in the education space. I can pinpoint very specific laws in the region that, for example, prevent you from moving away from a traditional report card towards a skills transcript or towards a portfolio-based transcript. Anyways, yeah, that would be the gist of my message, and I'm done talking.
Thank you, Raya. Guy, I can see you put your hand up, so I'll let you kind of comment on that billboard question with people getting squirmy in their seats.
I really want to echo what Raya said, because I finally had the fortune of speaking to Rob Hoban as well as Bob. So these are two of the co-founders of Agora School in Netherlands. And I actually tried to invite them to Clubhouse, but they don't use iPhone at the moment. So they're waiting to actually for the Android version to come out. And as soon as that happens, I will invite them to Clubhouse, and we're going to have a deep dive discussion on how this education with no classroom, no syllabus, but with a wonderful adaptation to look at the nature and productivity, very close to real life, and in my opinion, very value adding. This is to see how this is applied in Europe. Agora School has now got 12 schools around the Netherlands, and they're expanding into Belgium. So I'm going to work with them to actually try to expand this to China. And I think that'd be a very interesting project to see how this radical idea is actually implemented in China. I'd like to say that actually in China, there's also a bunch of education reformers, and they are working very, very hard. And build very kind of like innovative ideas, but not quite as innovative, not quite as revolutionary as Agora schools. But more importantly, we do see a number of education reformists and who has experienced the issues of education as we have experienced in the past, and they are passionately working to actually make it better and to conduct more experiment. It's a very courageous thing to do. So I think we need to give stage to this team and support them as much as we can. And I certainly would be working with Agora School to actually hopefully to enrich their science curriculum. And I know of a dozen education content providers from other countries who has very innovative thought on how to make certain education of certain subjects more efficient, and also to kind of crave more creativities. And I'm very pleased to see that there are more and more people doing this. And Agora School actually received good level of support from the government of the Netherlands, and I think more needs to be done from elsewhere in the world, just so that we at least have a chance to see how we can do education better and actually make it more personalized, make it more varied, and so that we can help them and help us to build a better tomorrow. And I'm looking forward to actually talk more with Giancarlo, especially with his connection to the government, and of course working with Nathan, so that we can get more support from the society by and large through his amazing reach on the media. Done speaking for now. Thank you.
Well, I mean, the interesting part with what's happening with RewirEd, I think, Kai, what you've just said is a brilliant connect with that, is that because it's happening in the midst of Expo 2020, there is this opportunity of working with nearly 190 countries who are actually going to be participating with pavilions and presence over there, and amplifying their education missions, whether it's the usual, let's call it, actors that you see at the top, whether it's from a Finland perspective, South Korea, in the Nordic countries, to people who are trying innovative models in places in Africa, for example, or in other parts of Asia. I see that Sean has also joined us on stage. Sean, out of, I guess, the brilliance of us trying to prototype new dialogues and new pathways in education is we'd like to have different voices. So I can see you've got a very intriguing background. You're a philosopher. You have conversations around wisdom. I can see you're also an artist. So I'd love to have you come on stage and share your thoughts on what will your billboard message be, and which would make people uncomfortable, but you feel would be necessary to help us move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Aman. That's a really cool prompt. And I would say that education is more than career preparation, and that any education that does not take in the full human perspective of flourishing, thriving, interpersonal connection, emotional health, and decision making from a holistic standpoint is one that does somewhat of a disservice to students. And I would encourage other kinds of approaches to a positive psychology-based or programs and initiatives that help students understand themselves, understand what matters to them, and really seek a meaningful purpose and existential kind of grounding before and as a pathway towards meaningful careers. So to keep it really short, that's where I would go. It would be to implore people to really know who they are, to understand who they are, and to commit to kind of a lifelong journey of that, where we're able to leverage our own self-awareness towards greater public good, kind of shifting a little bit from career readiness, not that that's not incredibly important, to kind of human readiness and human flourishing, and from a holistic perspective, that we need to kind of put that, if not at the center of our education, at least as a component that really matters moving into an age where we're going to be more interconnected than ever, and we may not have the human emotional bandwidth to really, or some of us will not have that to thrive in that era that's going to be presenting mental health challenges, and already is. So thank you, Aman. It's a great prompt. It's kind of off the cuff, but that's what I would say.
Well, Sean, thanks very much. I think you must be telepathic, because you probably are seeing our schedule for the next week, which is going to be touching on things which are pretty much what you've talked about. How do you focus on inner growth as opposed to just the external development of the human? So I think that's a brilliant, relevant point. I'd like to now bring on Jacob on. He's got a background in venture capital, and obviously we spoke about how financing, while a lot of that is happening, as Nathan commented earlier, that it's important to bring in something from different actors, from funding the system change that's necessary. So Jacob, I'd love to have your perspective, your experiences. You've been doing work at Impact Capital as well. Thank you.
I'm Chinese, but I live in work for many years. So now I just want to talk about the Russia tech market. Now in Russia, most also so many startups about tech. Then already our company also invest one project named Closed. They use Minecraft robots to teach children how to do some programming work. So another tech is very popular and very important for the startup, attract so many money from Russia with VC capital. So this is very interesting. I look for Ahmed and Ria, your project is very interesting. I mean, how we can go to Russian market, because in Russia, so many bonds, many VCs look about VC projects and some collection for this. I think your project is speaking English, maybe Chinese language and maybe Russian language. So this Russian language is also very important. So education, I think, it's a good platform, but sometimes we speak another language, but the platform we can use to calculate another language. This is, I mean, is interesting. I didn't know, I always know Russian language and some many connect with many Russian born and I think we can create. I hope your platform go to Russian language market and to do this communication and think I want to try if you I already got to Instagram and we can connect. Thanks.
Thank you, Jacob. I was having a bit of difficulty hearing you, but I guess we realized, what you're saying about the importance of building these, collaborative energies, whether it's happening in Russia or elsewhere. So definitely let's connect offline and see what can be done together. Talar, your name was mentioned by Kai as well. I think you're doing some great work with your background at the Harvard Project Zero. So I'd love to have you come on stage and share with us your thoughts on what that headline that you'd love to have a guest on stage and get people to think about.
Yeah. Hi, Aman. Thank you for the opportunity. And I'm actually just going to answer your question, and I'm going to kind of bounce off what Sean was saying. My question, if I was to have a billboard that people would look at, or especially educators and ministries of education, is what are you doing to keep these students engaged or willing to come to you? Because we're losing them. And I can tell you, whether it's their mental health or their interest in doing what we're offering, we are losing the young generation, and they will not come to education. They will find their pathways somewhere else. So what my big question is, what are you doing now that is going to keep all these students and learners engaged? That is what I have to say. That is the answer to the billboard question. Thank you so much.
All right, wonderful, Talar. By the way, I should have said that, part of the magic of doing these conversations in partnership with RewirEd is that we actually intend to curate the learnings from these dialogues and see, which of these insights do we take forward at actually the real stage in December. So it's not just metaphoric in a sense that I'm saying this. We actually are intending to see what we can do to bring these voices to the headlines in the front stage in December in the build up to that. So thank you.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Yeah, perfect. I'm perfectly fine with that. And when Raya, I think it was Raya, because I wasn't looking at my phone, when she said there actually are laws against changing the report cards, I think that is just criminal at this stage for what in regards to education. So yeah, thank you for the space, and I will move down. Thank you.
Thank you, Talar. So I'd love to have Eric come on stage. Again, Eric is involved with Boston EXO, and again, clearly his experience with innovation is important. He's got an impressive profile. Would have him share his thoughts on the question we are discussing right now. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Aman. So I think from a billboard standpoint, and this kind of brings me a little pain to say, because at one point I was even considering this, and this has to do with advanced degrees, right? So let's say you already have a bachelor's and you're looking to continue your education, right? Spend even more money with a traditional education system. I'd say skip the MBA. And why not just go right into a startup and get going, get the experience, and do that. I'm actually talking to somebody right now who is late 20s, early 30s, doing the traditional career path. And she has her heart set on, the GMATs, getting an MBA. She only wants to go to the top schools, not too sure who's going to pay for it. But, really, is an MBA worth all this money these days when you could just do it for real and just get the hands-on experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the idea of not living in the past with the paradigm models that suggest a pathway to success is certainly the case. So we were speaking of Finland earlier, and it's interesting because delighted to have Antti from Finland with us in the room. He is a veteran educator, entrepreneur. He's got a very interesting background. I spoke with him recently, and he actually said that his experience in education is 50 odd years. So I'd love to have come on stage and share his perspective on what he has seen happen from a place that's often seen to be the vanguard of leading education and innovation from the rest of the world. Antti.
First of all, Amar, thank you for the invitation. Could you please reset the room? I was having a debrief of an earlier workshop, so I joined in late. So my apologies for that. No worries. So just
happy to
wanting to make sure that I answered the question right.
Wonderful, absolutely. Yes. So for those of you who've joined us probably a short while back, this Education Reimagined series, we're trying to figure what's needed, not just at the idea stage, but the action stage, to prototype new directions in education and do it in a way that lands at a global stage. That's happening in Dubai later this year at the RewirEd Summit. from December 12 to 14, both in real flesh, so to say, COVID permitting, but also online. So I suppose the question I had left the panel with last time, which everyone's been looking to address with interesting perspectives, is this notion of, well, if you get a billboard or a stage to speak at RewirEd in December, what would that headline billboard say that you feel would address the core direction that education needs to take, but more importantly, that may make people uncomfortable when it comes to changing direction, but yet is very necessary?
Right. So I would say that innovation in education is using your creativity in solving the question and in learning. So it means that in order to be able to address the future of education and to solve those problems that we are addressing, you need to use creativity. So that then boils down that, okay, how do you teach creativity, and where the creativity comes from? It comes from play. It comes from arts. It comes from freedom of expression. And then when you are using the innovation, creativity in coming up with the solutions, then you need to be scaling those solutions up, and that is then when entrepreneurship comes in, and where Eric, the previous speaker, was then addressing that entrepreneurship is also one of the best ways to learn how to deal with the kind of scaling and addressing the problem. So I would say that the thing that needs to happen is us to be better in creativity first, and then after creativity, then it's about entrepreneurship. And that's why, for example, I have been working during the last years in startup world, making sure that those best entrepreneurs in the area of education are getting the support that is needed. Thanks.
Thank you, Antti. Thanks very much for that perspective. Yeah, entrepreneurship is a big thing. In fact, one of the themes here at the RewirEd event is, the future of work as well, and future of youth. So clearly, the idea of entrepreneurship is very relevant. Now, I'm actually privileged to have a friend, a partner, and someone who probably epitomizes this whole idea of dark matter that we began discussing. Indy Johor from London. We're working with him as well with their teams in London on the RewirEd project. So I'd have him on stage and see what he's sensing is the message we need to be leaving for RewirEd's attendees, leaders, and it's quite necessary as well. Indy, we'd love to have you come in. Thank you.
Thanks, man. It's an honor to be here and actually amongst so many amazing people. So just as a provocation, and I suppose I speak as a parent right now more than anything else, I think we need to stop seeing schools as childcare. I think schools are actually largely functioning as childcare. They're not working as learning systems at all. And, none of the stats seem to support. I mean, it's really interesting how significant and important over COVID, we've realized that schools were just fantastic childcare systems that we needed for our economy to carry on working in the way it was designed. And I think there's a really fundamental question here about the relationship of what we've really been seeing utilizing schools for. And is it a place to park kids? I'm not sure it's yet a place to fully grow them. And that parking of kids allowed the rest of us to carry on leading our slightly abusive lives of traveling around the world. And I include myself completely in this and working in the way that we did. And I suppose, and the provocative question, I suppose, is also, if schools are childcare, then they're designed perfectly for that. A 30-person classroom is nothing to do with teaching. We all know that actually you might as well have 150-person, 500-person, after 15 people, 12, 15 people. The classroom size doesn't make any difference whatsoever because it's all asymmetric learning. And actually, it's only when you get to 10 or 12 or then 6 or 7 or 2 do you get the strategic outcomes? So micro schools, and I think Dr. Mara is going to join us hopefully straight after me, talking about the role of micro schools and kind of the relationships of learning around that. So my provocation would be, schools are largely just childcare, and children that succeed tend to do so because of their own curiosity or the kind of supportive infrastructure that parents tend to provide them. Actually, very little to do with the kind of educational services we create, and that's partly an illusion. With that, this is Indy, and I'm out.
Brilliant provocation, I guess, and as you said, a very nice connect to what I see in terms of experience Dr. Mara would bring with her passion and experience with micro schools. Dr. Mara, would love to have you come on stage for sharing your perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. And Indy, I want to totally build off of what you just said. So if I were to put a billboard up, especially here in the U.S., that would really challenge people to think and make them wonder why I had put it up, why we had put it up, it would be, why are you still sending your child to public school? Or why are you still sending your child to school? Because I think, just as Indy said, people are using it as childcare, and they're not questioning the quality of what goes on. They're not questioning what happens with their child all day and whether that's actually benefiting their child's growth and development. So, just as a short history for those who don't know me, I am trained. I have a doctorate in instructional technology, so lots of training in formal education, 20 plus years in public education, and I trained to become a superintendent of a school district, only to lose my job 8 years ago. I apologize. I'm driving. So what I chose to do with that education after losing my job in a district level position was to create a new pathway. So I help teachers to build their own small schools. I'm up to half a dozen schools in our network, with another 6 coming online this fall, 2 actually out of the United States. So we're working to build, more of a global alternative to the big system of education. And I do believe smaller, more personalized, student-directed learning is what we really need and what kids want. Again, apologies for my GPS.
No worries. Thanks, Dr. Mara. Appreciate it. Drive safe wherever you're heading towards. Derek, I can see that your experience at the grassroots level. You've worked across the world. When you also worked in the UAE, where you're based. You worked in this region. You worked in New Zealand. And with your experience, across different levels of school, leadership-wise, as well as in the classroom, would love to have your perspective on the question we are discussing. Thank you.
Thank you, Aman. I think I just kind of hit 2 provocations that I would want to throw, especially to a group of people that were coming to talk about education. And one of the things that's kind of stuck with me really on Facebook is there's so many, not Facebook, Clubhouse, is there's so many people talking about things. And what I want to do is I want to come in as the old man in the room and say, we've been talking about this stuff and we've been saying these same things for 25 years. The ideas that you're bringing to the table are not necessarily innovative. What we need is people who can actually implement and scale and to value improvement as much as innovation. And, kind of one of the things that I wanted to touch on, like with what Rhea was saying earlier about the laws that are standing in the way in the MENA region. But I can also say that 1999, I was teaching high school graduates in Dubai who, young Emiratis who had a high school degree, couldn't add 4 single digits or write a complete sentence in Arabic. And so, there have been some laws that put in place to improve that. So we've got to value the improvement as much as we value the innovation. And that would be the provocation that I would give to educators. This is Derek, and I'm finished speaking. Thanks for the space.
Thank you, Derek. All right. So I'd like to have Lisa join us again. She brings perspective. She's been involved with education. She runs her own club as well with women in education. And I think it's important for us to have, the idea of gender lens in education is a huge thing that is, in terms of progress or the lack thereof, in case the challenges that the world of gender equity in education were already, a tragedy pre-COVID, they're becoming a bigger tragedy in COVID. So we'd love to have your, perspective, Lisa, on where you see the direction of conversation around, billboards and what the message and the provocation should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Aman. Such a pleasure to be here from way over in southern sunny California, where perspectives around education are probably very different from where they are where you sit. And what I wanted to make sure to share is, first of all, I want to thank you for acknowledging that, because my passion to raise up the voices of women in educational leadership, particularly women of color, indigenous women, is because we only represent 19% of the leadership positions in this country, in the United States. And there is something definitely wrong with that picture. But secondarily, what I would really like to see, Aman, is where is the intersection between what we are experiencing in the States with our marginalized communities? I'm a second generation Latina. And where are the intersections of our marginalized communities here in the States, our Black and Brown, particularly our Black and Brown communities, with those across the globe? And how are we perceived? And how do we perceive you? And again, where is that intersection? What can we learn about what uh, educators have done around the globe to improve things for their marginalized communities or not? And what can you observe in what we are doing to, scratch your heads and go, oh my gosh, I didn't know, and I'm going to say this, that it was that bad. Because as a school board member, I will tell you that it is that bad. Now, not in my school board in Southern California, but in the vast majority of districts across the country. And, again, here in California, we are almost a country amongst ourselves, 40 million people. But if we don't have those intersections, Amon, those understandings between what our marginalized communities are experiencing, the humongous learning loss that's being experienced, the fact that we have the federal government issuing us ESSER funds to do something about that, as though the money is like this magic pill. And if we cannot bring together our global communities to look at that, then I just think, to Indy's point, we continue to be these child care facilities. And it's so important because I will come on and listen to global educators speak, and some of them will say, oh, well, we don't have that problem. We don't have the marginalized communities. We don't have issues with Black and Brown children. And I completely understand that. But if you don't understand our perspectives, if you don't understand what some of us are experiencing, then we cannot have this mutually agreeable, productive conversation going forward, because I want to learn and grow with my global leaders. And I hope that those of you that are not in the United States would want to learn and grow with us too. Thank you so much for allowing me to share, and I'm complete.
Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate that. Yeah, just, echoing. I mean, I think it's interesting that sometimes, we all seem to think that we are made different, but at the end of it, the core atom is the same. And therefore, we are discovering that the challenge that's faced in Southern California is often the challenge faced in Southern Africa, is the same thing in the southern part of Saudi Arabia, and the same thing in Australia. But it's coming at a different nuance. It's packaged differently, it's presented differently, and it needs a dialogue, as you said, the integration, the interconnectedness, to allow us that space to explore those commonalities and, I guess, not focus just on the differences. So thank you very much for sharing your insights. I'd love to invite Cedric on stage. Cedric again brings in perspective. He's involved with EdTech. He's involved with education and curriculum. Would love to have you come on stage, Cedric, and share some thoughts. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me on stage. I appreciate you all having the space. And definitely, when I see education innovation, thoughts go through my mind, and I've noticed that you all's club in Clubhouse for a while. So thank you for that. And I jumped up here mainly because a couple of points that Lisa was making, more so around the focal points on the intersectionalities, and particularly when referencing and thinking about marginalized communities. So naturally for me, I'm a Black man who grew up in the States. I guess you can say I grew up in what you would coin the inner city of, an urban community, or for short, the hood, as we call it. So for me, coming up, right, there was an understanding of, number one, what expectations were of, what people would foresee, not necessarily myself individually, but my group, right, that I identified with demographically in our future. So, with that, uh, I went into, first I didn't start out in education. Just to give a little context for me, I actually started out in science. So I was a career changer from chemistry into education. Went from being a chemist in science and worked my way up to being an instructional coach and then an assistant principal, in which case now I work from home in ed tech. We're focusing mostly in math curriculum, and that was all due to the little guy that you see strapped to my chest, my son. I wanted to be a stay-at-home dad, which I am. And with that, I became a content creator. And the focal point of my work and what I do now, and what I've kind of always focused on, is being a strong representation for those in my community, and also being sure that the information that I've gathered over the years is being reciprocated back. Because what I found is that there's a lot of information that benefits the vast majority of people whenever they have it, right? And the difference, I think, is more so that there's pockets, in time and space, in community, in the world, where there are gaps, right? And we notice these oftentimes, and we coin them as different things in the education system and in the world. For example, talking about achievement and so on and so forth. But for me, the understanding is that there has to be a space and an opportunity for creativity to flourish, number one, and also for information to meet that creativity. So for me, for example, I create content, math content for elementary students, um, that is written in the context of Black history and culture, as it relates more so to American society, American history, right? Because there's a lack within the schools that we've identified. Black history is not necessarily taught, and for to that point, there's no connection even made to Black people globally, right, or anyone in the diaspora, if you will, and that's not represented, as well as the mathematics content and the way that it's delivered it's different because we have a lot of different students. So for that, I think just the consideration of not necessarily innovation, as you mentioned before, like this may be an innovative point, but then also building upon what already exists, and dealing with things like financial literacy and more pieces that are actually really practical in focusing. So that's what a lot of my work is focused on. And I try to collaborate with people who are, kind of like-minded in that space. And I think that that's kind of where things need to shift, because we're seeing there's a growth, right? And there's a big push happening, but some people are going to get left behind. And the issue and the concern is that those people that are being left behind are the ones who have always been lagging because they didn't have the information or the opportunity. So just some things to keep in mind, and I wanted to throw out. So I appreciate this space. Again, I'm Cedric, and I'm done speaking.
Thank you, Cedric. And I think it's kind of an uncanny thing that, Indy spoke of childcare and you kind of referenced your young child strapped to yourself. So wonderful. Thanks for joining us. Our, I guess, last guest we'd want to invite on stage is Nancy. We're seeing the potential of project-based learning. I think Raya is obviously a big advocate of that, and she can probably speak on this for much, much longer than I can. But I'd like to maybe have Nancy to come on stage and share her thoughts on what's her big message, provocation going to be for the leaders and the audiences in December. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and for having this space. I'm enjoying listening to all these amazing educators and their thoughts and passions. And one thing that I am very passionate about is the quality of education, as I'm sure we all are. But specifically, I truly believe that kids should be taught skills to help them for the future. And in addition to like life skills, like practical things, I think that we need to focus on things to make them be more creative, to practice their analyzing skills, their critical thinking skills, their solving skills, all of those 21st century skills. And I think it's the way of how we teach, how we present information, and what we have our kids do in the classroom. Because if we just have them do busy work, or just have them, like someone said, be in childcare, just be there to be there. We're not going to produce these innovative, well-rounded students. We're going to produce machines who just memorize information. So I think that is why I think that is important to have students practice these important skills, because we can integrate those skills in the future. They need those skills, and that's why I am so passionate about project-based learning. I think that is one really good method of teaching to implement in the classroom, because through project-based learning, students are learning the content that they need to learn, that is required by the state, by the school, whatever, but they are also practicing these really important skills. So that's just my 2 cents on it, and I wanted to contribute that, and thank you again for having me. And this is Nancy, and I'm done speaking.
Nancy, thanks very much for joining. I mean, absolutely. I think what you're saying with respect to giving them those real skills that make a difference versus just kind of, a badge that they have is so important, especially in the world that I guess these kids are growing into. So we're at the top of the hour from a room perspective, and we want to make sure that we are, I guess, focused. And this has been a brilliant conversation. I guess before I wrap up, Raya, I'd like to maybe have you say a few words on what you felt were the key insights that you picked up, and then we can close the room after that. Thank you.
Sure. I think that I actually agree with, I think his name was Derek. There we go. Derek. I actually agree with Derek. I think we need innovation both from within the system and from outside of the system. Personally, for me, I am most excited by working in the alternative education space. But of course, I've seen some amazing work be done within schools as well, who are finding ways to tweak things towards the right direction. And what was nice, I think, from hearing from all the guest speakers today, we had a nice range from people who are working kind of within the system, within the constraints of the system, and those who are outside of it, reinventing and reimagining the system. Again, if there's one last note I would like to leave people with, is to really question all of the assumptions we make about education. I think a lot of what holds us back from truly innovating are challenges in vision and imagination and in narratives more than practicalities. So just to end on a more provocative note, imagine you were to redesign our entire system, and imagine you design a system with no exams. Imagine we didn't have subjects. Imagine we didn't even have school buildings, right? Like, if you had to start over from scratch and design an education system for today's economy and for today's world, what would it look like? Would it look like what it looks like today, or would it look radically different? It's a fun exercise I like to keep practicing with my team and myself, and it's something I hope that you all practice as you reimagine education. I'm done talking.
Wonderful provocation to, I guess, close the proceedings. Again, thanks everyone who joined us on stage: Kai, Eric, Antti, Indy, Jacob, Cedric, and Nancy, and those who were speaking before, Derek, Dr. Lisa as well, and Dr. Mara. This is, our first event. We're, I guess, excited and, I guess, keen to learn from what's happening. We've put out a series of topics that we plan to talk about in the next several weeks, beginning with discussing the humane education element, evidence-based education, the idea of the mastery transcript. We'll cover well-being foundations, solutionary education, talking about how do we learn in, from, and with nature, and a host of several other topics on a weekly basis, and bring in stakeholders from across the realms, whether it's multilateral leaders, whether it's government administrators, whether it's the youth population, and so on. So we'd love to have you join us. I mean, this room is being hosted by Education Innovation. We are also, we've set up a separate room that we may use in the future. It's called Education Reimagined. So if you're keen on getting updates on how we kind of do things there in a few weeks from now, please follow that club as well. But again, thanks very much for joining us from wherever you did across the world, whether it was California or down under in Australia. And thanks for your insights and your generosity. And with that, we are done with this room, and hopefully see you next week. Thanks, everyone.
See you next week. Aman and everyone. Wonderful. Wonderful room.
Thank you.
Lovely. Bye, everyone.
Bye. See you.
Thank you, Raya and Mark. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.